Tech Trends 24/7 Leaders is a passionate podcast hosted by James P. Quinn on technology innovation. It provides insightful interviews with key and inspiring innovators in areas of corporate technology, office of the future, AI, real estate, sustainability, assistive technologies, and other emerging technologies. Tech Trends 24/7 Leaders will smartly position you where your business, life, and industries are moving for the future.
On today's episode, we are excited to have Joe Brancato on the podcast. Joe is a managing principal for Gensler, a premier global architectural firm. He's the chairman of the firm's board of directors and has led Gensler into new markets. He provides thought leadership and regularly speaks on topics such as driverless cars and urban planning. Joe has helped shape the future of our cities in the design of post-pandemic office buildings. Welcome, Joe.
Joe Brancato, great to have you today. Thanks for being on the podcast. We're really looking forward to having a great discussion with you.
Great. Thanks, Jim. It's good to see you. Thanks for having me. I'll briefly share some of the thoughts on the post-pandemic workplace.
That'd be great. Yeah. So, why don't we just dive in, Joe? What is Gensler really seeing about the post-pandemic workplace? Because there are countless articles on it. It's top of mind for everybody. Everybody's trying to figure out, what does this look like now? And I know you're at the forefront of it, so it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's an interesting time because so much is changing, and so to try and understand, stay ahead of it is really the challenge. And the world we knew is just continuing to change. And Midtown Manhattan, like many central business districts around the U.S., it was built on a 5-day-a-week commute. So that is a problem so momentous now that after decades as the dominant office district in the country, real estate developers and city planners are trying to figure out what else they can offer to bring back its vitality. Some of the assets, like office buildings, are at a critical inflection point as their uses evolve. How are the tenants going to use these buildings? The rise of remote work has changed user demands. And we all have a front row seat as we try to understand the changes that are actually going to stick. So we must understand our clients' culture. We have to understand their business before we start advising them on a workplace strategy that's appropriate for them. One size will not fit all. We know that it's never really one size has never fit all, but even more so now. I have to tailor it to what most companies are going to have in regard to their hybrid work model. Now, we have all sides of the spectrum. Many companies that have how aggressive are they going to be with their work from home model? Mm-hmm. So there's some outliers on either end of the spectrum. I'm not going to name names because they're my clients, and I don't think but some of the major financial firms.
Yep,
they're on one side of the spectrum. They've been more bullish for a long time on in-office time, on work from the office. However,
that definition, Joe, is like 4 to 5 days a week, correct? Is that
right? They wanted them in a majority of the week, 4 to 5 days a week. They said that they wanted their people back early on during the pandemic, as when things started to loosen up a little bit in 2021. And they had to backtrack because there was some pushback, right? But I think that, and they understand there is some leeway and there is some type of hybrid model, but they're on one side of the spectrum and they're pushing back. They're actually engaging. And as I walk through some of their spaces now, there's more people there, and it's not just on Wednesday. We also have a handful of successful organizations, like some of the tech companies, that are making more virtual work a big incentive in their recruiting. Mm-hmm. Employees can work from home 5 days a week. I don't think this is good for the long-term health of their organization. They could say, well, we're hitting our revenue targets, but soon they won't be hitting their revenue targets. And we can look at, some of the companies. So the Meta, Facebook CEO, suggested that they need to get their people back to work because they're not acting as entrepreneurs right now. There's other tech companies. One of the other big tech companies, their CEO said, we're not innovating as quickly
Mhm.
as we used to. Matter of fact, one of them that's lost over 50% of their value in the last year alone hasn't innovated or brought anything new to the market in the last 2 years.
That's interesting.
They're barely working from home.
Yeah, just on that point, Joe, I think when you talk about corporate culture, if you're an organization that's doing remote work 5 days a week, it's kind of hard to have a culture if everybody's working in their home office. Is that kind of the point you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I always like the analysis, the analogy that Jacques Cousteau used. He said about the environment. He said that think about the environment like a bank account. You save your money, you're making interest, but if you start clipping into the interest and spending the interest, that's okay. But once you start hitting the principal and you start cutting away at the principal, there's going to be a time where there's no return.
Mhm.
And with the environment, maybe we're starting to see it now, right? I think that's the exact same analogy that you use for corporate culture. For the last 2 years, we've been burning off corporate culture by people not being together, by hiring many new people in these organizations, and seeing significant turnover. Now you have new people. They could read your guiding principles. They could see you on the screen, and they may show up once a week, twice a week, but maybe not the same time as others. And they're not really learning the corporate culture, because corporate culture behavior has a lot to do with corporate culture.
Mhm.
It has everything to do with corporate culture, and you have to see it. And if you don't see it and you're new, you don't really understand it. So yes, I think that corporate culture is part of the issue, and that's something, as you burn it off, has significant impact on
And I
companies.
guess part of that goes hand in hand, mentorship, right? It's kind of hard also to mentor somebody if it was 100% on Zoom. There's got to be kind of a hybrid interaction on that. Would you agree?
I agree. The learning that happens, you have culture and you have learning, and that happens best when we're together. There's plenty of learning programs online, but people aren't asking all the questions they need to or they'd like to, because they're one of 25 on the screen. So it does happen, and it happens when you're side by side, when you're working on a project together, or when you're walking at to visit the construction site with somebody a little more senior than you, that you can learn. But I also think, Jim, I think that sponsorship is really important too.
Mhm.
And sponsorship does not happen unless people are together and you see somebody that really has something special, that has the drive, the passion, and you can guide them and you could sponsor them. Not just mentor, but you could sponsor them outside of your office, outside of your organization. Give them opportunity because you've spotted them, you've been around them. It continues to be confirmed that they do have this talent, or they have this drive, and you become their sponsor. That probably doesn't happen when you're not together with senior leaders. So I think there's the hybrid model in the middle, Jim. We talked about the two spectrums, but in the middle is probably where 95% of the companies will be, maybe 3 to 4 days a week in the office, and I think we're evolving to that, and I think that also leads to a really, really interesting conversation with our clients, because and we'll probably discuss it later, but people thinking, do we share space?
Well, I guess you're leading right into my next question. So thank you. How are you seeing it affecting real estate requirements? If it's kind of like it's down the middle, it's hybrid. If you're a CFO, you're probably like, look, this might be an opportunity for us to shed space, improve the bottom line. That's a really good thing. But what are you seeing from your pane of glass?
Jim, before I answer that question, I want to just make one point. This cannot just be about the expense side of the equation. How do I reduce my expenses by cutting the real estate? This has to be, how do I protect my greatest asset and create an environment and experiences that they can have in this office, multiple experiences that they want to get back, because that's the revenue side. That's the top line that we have to focus on. I was in Toronto yesterday with one of our clients who opened their first phase of their offices, which was about 600,000 square feet in a new tower. We've been working on it for the last 5 years, and we're just starting the second tower now. And I was sitting with them, and I said, so tell me about your access to the C-suite, to the CEO, to the head of HR. Has it changed pre-pandemic to now?
It's a great question.
They said 180 degrees, boy. I'm speaking more with the leaders of this firm in the C-suite than I've ever had, because the work environment is critical to our people, and having our people together, even in this hybrid environment, and creating these great experiences are even more important than ever before. So it's not just about the expense side, how much space can I shed? It's really about what is the right mixture of spaces and experience that we could create. And if we're going to be sharing in some of sharing space, and we can let some space go, we will. But that's not the driver. The driver's the people. So I think that's been really, so I just wanted to just preface with that thought.
That's a great point.
Jim, in 10 major U.S. markets in June, I was reading there was a slight uptick in the office occupancy. It was in the low 40s. They looked at 10 major markets. Austin was leading with 61% occupant, and San Jose, California, was the lowest with 34%. So the average was somewhere in the low 40s between these 10, where in terms of occupancy in June in office space. And so it's important when looking at this number to compare it to real occupancy rates before the pandemic. And you probably know well, we've seen it, and it was somewhere around 70%. When you take out the vacation and the travel and the sick time, and it was about 70%.
Fridays, that type of thing, sure.
Right. So, but if you look at the typical hybrid work model that we're talking about now, with say 3 days in the office, your average peak day, probably Wednesday, would have an occupancy projecting now in this fall, as people have started to get back a little more. The peak day, 80% occupancy, which is higher than the typical day pre-pandemic. So the question to many of our corporate clients is, do we design for peak occupancy, or are we designing for average occupancy? And if you're going to do for average occupancy, then there's a sharing that's going to go on. And are you ready for that? And it's interesting, as some of our clients, many of our clients say yes, okay, but how much sharing? It differs from one organization to the next, but also within an organization from one group, depending on what they do, to the next. But I can tell you, there are certain companies, certain organizations like law firms, the lawyers don't want to give up their offices. They'll take smaller offices, but they don't want to give up their office, even if they're only there 2 days, 3 days a week.
Interesting.
So it's a hard question, and all we can do, is design spaces that are even more flexible than before, and let the workplace evolve.
Yeah. So you mentioned the workplace, Joe. How do you see the role of the workplace now? And you guys have been very creative, nationally and globally, to bring that creativity to the workplace. What's the role of it today? Because it's really, this post-pandemic, it's really turned on a dime, correct?
Right. It's really interesting, trying to figure out, how you create the workplace to make it commute worthy. One thing's for sure, we're hearing it from leadership that up until this point in the pandemic, they've leveraged their culture capital to help them hold their firms together, right? And we just spoke about it. But because their talent had been apart for some time, they are losing. They're losing their culture a bit. They're losing something. The cracks are showing, and that's why we're hearing some leaders in some companies switch a little bit more to saying, well, I do have to get my people back, even if it's a few days a week. That maybe previously were saying you could work from home 5 days a week. It's fine. Our numbers, our revenue shows fine, until it doesn't. The very thing that helps these companies differentiate themselves from their competition is the culture. So what makes them unique is being lost. I would say, as a role of the office shifts from it needs to shift from really being an obligation to a destination. And it's got to be more centered around the connectivity, the meetings, connecting the teams, engaging with clients, and building networks, internal networks. I don't know, when I was starting, I got excited about a lot of things, but there were a few things by being around people that I thought were really interesting, and I was able to learn from them. I was able to make my choices because I saw it, I felt it, I knew who to go to. And as companies become, more diverse, maybe more global, more distributed, creating your internal network is critical. And so getting people back, making the space more about a destination for people to come to and to connect is really, really important. The traditional work environment was centered on focus-oriented spaces like the workstation and office, right? I mean, you remember, that's what it was. Majority of the space was that, and that's what it was all about. The private office and the workstation.
Yep.
And once in a while you have a pantry that was, near the core, hidden. You have to walk in there.
Coffee was not good.
It was terrible coffee, and it was next to the bathroom. So it wasn't a good situation. But as the demand for space is shifting, the recipe is changing as well. And we see space being reapportioned from individual spaces to a broader range of spaces, including the more spaces for co-creation, to engage with teams and with clients, in our case, with consultants, with other people, contractors, more amenity and inspiration spaces where employees can work in different settings and be creative, and more connection or meeting spaces. And it doesn't just have to be, if you're a 5-floor tenant, have a half a floor that's set up for amenities and conferencing and town hall and a nice cafe. It also happens on the floor. And one of the things when I walked through that space of this new build out that was just completed yesterday when I was up in Toronto, when I would go on a workplace floor, not the amenity floors, because they have more amenity space now than they ever had. And when I was walking through there yesterday, it was full. Matter of fact, in their they call it their auditorium. It's a really large multi-purpose room, column free. They had 800 people in there. Wow. When I walked through the other spaces, they were being used in different ways. But when I walked on the workplace floor, it's really interesting. It wasn't just a lineup of benches, sit-stand benches, right? That go on forever. There were some of those, but adjacent to those, they had different types of spaces, whether they're sofas and soft seating, whether it was a small conference area that you could pull the curtain around to have some privacy, whether it was a phone booth, whether it was a countertop facing out, running parallel to the perimeter wall, the glass, and looking out, and they could plug in anywhere they want. So they had a variety of different workplaces, because particularly the younger generations, it's hard for them to sit in a workstation or to sit in an office for any length of time. They move around, they want different work environments, and we're providing that. So it's really changing quite a bit. Think about comfortable, inviting spaces that have more of a hospitality and a residential influence that provides some level of informality as a place that people want to be. You have to remember, many of these people have been working from home for a long time. So you don't want it to be too close to the refrigerator, though, because that's been happening at home, right? But you want to give them those comfortable places in the office.
That's true. And then, Joe, what are you seeing as the right mix of amenities for buildings now? So part of that setting up that collaborative space and making sure people are engaged. And as your earlier points in terms of a destination, what are the amenities that you're seeing that really corporations need to implement to pull that off?
Yeah, so it varies for different people. I'll share a few thoughts of different companies. So let me just share a few thoughts about what landlords are doing regularly, because the landlords in some of these office buildings are trying to attract tenants. So they're doing it in their buildings, and they're all upgrading their amenity package. And then there's larger tenants that are providing their own amenities, and then mid and small size are providing some level of amenities. So if you just think of landlords, they're all looking to add these amenities that are going to make their buildings commute worthy to tenants, right? So the traditional amenities like the fitness center and the cafeteria and the conference center, they're shifting to a variety of different offerings and even different scales.
Okay.
Fitness centers are now more about yoga and cycling studios with embedded technology to provide an elevated experience. The cafeterias are now designed with a variety of food and beverage offerings so they can attract people throughout the day, not just at lunchtime.
Mm-hmm.
More like a restaurant that's open most of the day, like an eataly, right, where you can go at any time and get whatever you want and come up and have a different experience throughout the day or different days of the week. These things start to change. The espresso bar changes to where they're serving alcohol after 5 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to, and they're also, one other thing, Jim, some of these spaces are being used as throughout the day. And when you start counting, we used to count, I remember we'd be asked, how many square foot per person is that? You have to figure out the density, right?
Yeah.
Well, now what they're saying is the square foot per person, and then it was, and then they would divide it also by the, they take the total square footage and divide it by the number of workstations or offices. And
Mm-hmm.
so now we're looking at a square foot per work point. And a work point is not just the workstation or the private office, but it's the cafe seating, it's the lounge seating, it's all these other work points. And one of our clients, right? I mean, many of our clients are doing this, right? So they're measuring it that way. So I think we're looking at a different measurement. But one of them has, 10,000 people they have to accommodate, and they're doing it with 7,500 work points because they have the hybrid model. And throughout the day, most people are probably sitting in that same office all day long. They're using other spaces, so they're counting work points. So I think things are starting to shift, and the amenities in these spaces are those work points that are being counted. So they're much higher utilization, the amenity spaces, and they're increasing the amenity spaces. So and also think about this: anything that's going to provide convenience for your talent or for your tenants is really important now, because some of these people are coming in at 10 o'clock in the morning to work, and they're working until 8 o'clock, or they may take off in the middle of the day to maybe they want to work out in the middle of the day, or maybe they want to go get their hair cut, or maybe they want to do something else and then come back later on at 9 o'clock at night to do something in the office. So haircuts, place for haircuts and manicures and wellness, some clinics, even one of the companies called Rapport, they're starting to go into some of these amenity spaces, and it's all about mental wellness. They're taking the curse off of mental health, right? It's mental wellness, and they define it as somewhere in the middle between a spa and clinical. Somewhere in the middle. It's many people, right? So they don't have to go, and they may be in a little more discrete locations in a building, but whatever is going to create convenience. The farmers market once in a while. Barclays did it. We did their space out in New Jersey. We got the farmers market that comes in. We had the Girl Scout cookie selling every once in a while. You have the local crafts, so they're tying into the community as well.
Joe, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm a little jealous you didn't tell me about the Girl Scout cookies. I would have been there that day. So,
Yeah, I like the ones with the peanut butter, Jim. So, the other thing that's really important, and they look for it, and every existing building has a setback or a roof converting to outdoor space that's usable in this market in New York. But some of the markets that have even a better climate, we have walls, the perimeter walls opening up onto terraces. So the perimeter wall is a folding wall that opens up, or a garage door that opens up, and it's the indoor-outdoor space is you can't tell, you can use it one to the next without having to open a door. And that's really starting to happen. We've even done it here in New York on one of the repositioning.
Yeah, you mentioned New York, and I remember being at your office, and my takeaway was a very collaborative space, and there was a lot of optionality, and very functional. That's what I mean. You guys are practicing what you preach, right? Because I could see, myself and my team going there. One day we would work, in one part, the next day the other. That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, Jim, that's exactly it. And we've also refining our space a bit, and providing a few more touch points, a little more a little more, as we have these different types of spaces like labs for some of the different things that we do, where people take over these spaces and they have the tools to test different things out, whether they're digital design elements, of course, our maker space, our model shop, our virtual reality lab. These are things that are happening. Our traditional library is a lot different than it used to be. It's half the size, but and there's materials and stuff there. It's very important for us to touch and feel and see. But there's a lot of different types of spaces. Of course, we have our very informal space. Even the way we locate certain, on every floor we have coffee, right? Well, it's all good. But the best coffee maker is on the third floor. It's the one that you have to get a license to drive. But it forces people to go down there if they want their macchiato or their latte. They go down there. So we force people down there, particularly after lunch. They're all down there, they're lined up, they're connecting with each other, people from other floors that you normally wouldn't see. I think one thing that's really different, Jim, and it's really important because it's normally not, whether it's forgotten or the clients, the corporate clients may not want to take it on, or the design firm is not suggesting it early enough, is one thing is the physical space and creating great experiences. But you also have to, corporate has to make sure, the tenant has to make sure that you're working hand in hand with them, because certain policies will have to change to support some of the things, or the space has to be designed in a way that the corporate policies are shifting, the protocols are adjusting to make it work hand in hand. So it has to align so you can truly have a wonderful experience and a space that's working for you. The last thing I wanted to mention on this, Jim, because you mentioned our space, you have to have, and one of the things that we're seeing more of is an experience manager. And people say, well, what do you mean? Well, I said, in a property, in a building, the landlord has property managers, and they manage that property so functionally it works well. The filters are changed, the plumbing is working, the security is working. And if there's something, if the pipe breaks, they're on it. In the tenant spaces, if you have an experience manager, things are evolving, are going to continually evolve. They can adjust things in the space so that you enhance the experience. If something's not working well, or people in certain spaces, or they're not having, but you find out why. Some of the time it's because there's not a great experience. There's not the right tools. There's not the right. It's not in the it's not adjacent to something that would be more meaningful, or the people that would normally use it. So, experience manager, I think, is going to become an important part of the program on any space.
That's a great point, and I think it's like you said, it's all about the experience. So it's kind of having a game plan for corporations to do that. It seems like it's really intuitive and smart to think along that way. I know we're coming up against it, Joe, and we really appreciate, how busy you are, but just two final questions I have for you. So when you're meeting with corporations and you're at the forefront of this, what's it like the top three things you would tell them if you were going to come up with three things?
Yeah, that's only three things.
Oh, I know it'd be more, but
All right.
I can
All
talk
right.
for the next
Well,
4 hours. I'm just
Well, I think it's just an exciting time to be in the design profession because things are shifting. We have a great a great entree to key players in organizations that we never had before. Whether it's a new development, the chief investment officer wants to know. Whether it's corporation, it's the head of real estate. You're teaming arm in arm with the head of real estate, but you're also, they're bringing you to the head of HR. And the CEO sometimes involved in what the design may be to make it commute worthy.
Mhm.
But I think there's a few things. One is the companies are investing in culture. It's relocation of square footage away from individualized workstations to share spaces. That's happening.
Okay.
Second thing is the flight to quality, which moving the Class A buildings with hospitality inspired building amenities. Or
Mhm.
substantially renovated office buildings and systems. And outdoor space, right? If they could get the outdoor space on some of these old buildings, we have some of the most incredible outdoor spaces. The Deutsche Bank, when they moved up to Columbus Circle, we designed their space.
I saw pictures of that. It was phenomenal. I mean, it was
Not,
like,
right? The outdoor space, I don't even know, it's thousands of square feet of outdoor former roof terraces that are roof decks that are now terraces with all kinds of connectivity out there. Phenomenal. The third thing is, focusing on health, wellness, and sustainability.
mhm.
I think that sustainability is such a big issue right now, and the CEOs are writing it in their letter to shareholders and how they're doubling down or committing to environmental sustainability or ESG, and now their own spaces have to really fall in line and maybe get out in front on some of these concepts. And then, as I said earlier, making the office a destination and not an obligation through great experiences. All this coming together
Yeah.
starts to help make a difference in terms of having a great space for people where they will come, and once they're there, they are strengthening their corporate culture. They're having a great experience, but also they're helping the bottom line of the firm too.
Yeah, I think the 3 points really kind of you almost want to be a part of an organization that hits those 3 areas, right? Because you want to feel you're part of something special. And we talked about it before. You can't get that working 5 days a week, in terms of on a Zoom call. And Zoom is good, it's effective, but I totally understand where you're coming from. I think they're great points. Last question, Joe. In terms of you've been at the forefront of the architectural world. What advice you give people in terms of working today, and what in kind of this new paradigm that we're in? What would your advice be
To young people coming into the business?
Yes, exactly.
I think that building, learning and finding your mentor is really important. You have to be a little aggressive to kind of keep your eyes open, listen, and then find that person that you respect. Because if you're being mentored and you're learning and you're building your internal network to be able to navigate and not only learn, but do your job even better, there's a certain level, and you're buying into the culture. There's a certain level of trust you're making between your colleagues and ultimately the company you work for. And when you do that, when you have trust and you have spaces that inspire you, there's loyalty. And so we hear all about the great resignation.
Mhm.
I think that there's been a lack of trust and a lack of loyalty. And that's easy to have when you're sitting at home majority of the week, not caring about your colleagues, or not feeling like part of a team that together you have purpose to do, purpose on what you're doing. And I think that's, physical environment comes into play here, but it's also for the younger people. Get in, build your internal network, find your mentor, and have purpose. And if you agree with the company's mission and their purpose, lock arms with others around you so that you can really make a difference.
Listen, Joe, I think that's sage advice. Thank you for your time. As always, a fantastic exchange. Really appreciate it. Next time we do it, we'll definitely do it on the Deutsche Bank terrace to get outside, which would be great, right?
You're not kidding. You're not kidding. It's a phenomenal spot, and I think they'd love to have us there.
Well, great, Joe. Thanks. Great seeing you. Appreciate it. We'll be in touch, and I'm so glad you were on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Jim. Good to see you.
Take care. Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Tech Trends 24/7 Leaders. To learn more about technology trends, you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can also read my book, Tech Trends 24/7 and the Impact of COVID-19, which is rated a must-read book by CIO Insight. The book is available for purchase on Amazon or on our website, Tech Trends 24/7. When conducting research for the book, I was inspired to see how technology innovation was making a positive difference in people's lives. As a result, in 2020, I founded Beacon of Hope 365. Our mission is to leverage technology to help people in need. More information on the charity can be found on beaconofhope365.org. Thanks again for tuning into the episode, and a big thank you to my entire podcast team, Lindsay Sowert, Brianne Lunghammer, and Sal Forcina. See you on the next episode.